Welcome to Security Watch. This is Zain. Today the topic of our show is the Doha Afghan peace process and also the United Kingdom and Pakistan, UK-Pak ties and relations. Today the guest of our show is, the special guest of our show is Lieutenant General Philip Jones. General Phil is a 3-star British general, and he's also served as the former Chief of Staff, NATO, and he's also a senior security advisor. The other guest, as always, is Rana Athar Javed, a senior geopolitical analyst and also DG Pakistan House. Welcome to our show, General Phillips. This is Zain Khan. It is a pleasure having you on Security Watch.
Thank you, Zain. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome to our show, as always, Rana Athar Javed. It is a pleasure having you on our show.
Thank you very much, Zain.
General Phillips, let's get to the first question. What is your assessment of the Doha peace process, the Afghan peace process, and its implementation? The prisoner exchange and intra-Afghan dialogue is progressing. Do you think that the peace in Afghanistan will be achieved through these mechanisms?
Well, I mean, it's a long process, Zain. And, many years ago, I gave up making predictions. I'm an eternal optimist. And as you may have seen from my bio, I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, and a part of that time I was working with the Afghan government on behalf of NATO and ISAF to see what we could do on the military side to support a peace process. And that was back in 2010. That was 10 years ago. And we were optimistic then. And everyone said it was going to be long and it's difficult. But one has to, if you are going to be optimistic about this, you have to take one step at a time and recognize that talking is better than not talking, and that concrete steps are better than no concrete steps. It's hugely complicated. There are lots of factors involved with this. There are lots of moving parts. It's not the sort of thing that you can necessarily draw to a conclusion like at the end of a war movie or something with some wonderful peace process where everyone sits down and signs a document. There are so many other things at play. What I would say is at least the peace process is now firmly in the political lexicon and in political dialogue in the way that it wasn't. People have tangible things to deal with around prisoner exchanges and things like that. And that's far, far better than we have been in the past, albeit that violence is still terrible.
Mr. Athar Javed, what is your expert opinion on this matter? Do you think that peace could be achieved in Afghanistan?
I think actually I'm also then very optimistic, but of course cautiously optimistic. I think it will achieve in terms of, as Phil pointed out, that it is regarding that it's now in lexicon and things are moving and tangible on the ground. But at the same time, we have to understand that the complexity compounded by several dozens of other actors, state actors, non-state actors, and the regional aspirations, how the Russians would look at that, how the Chinese are looking at it. And I'm going to name countries, so that will also clear more picture how Iran looks at it. Obviously, at the moment, United States and NATO members, states, all of them, and ISF, they are trying their hard to find a way out of it in a way in which it's not about, as we mentioned always, that it's not about victory or loss. It's about maintaining what is remaining, actually, inter-tribal relations within, which are very complex within Afghanistan. And also, since now Abdullah and all those other actors are coming along, so we can hope that this will culminate in a really in a peaceful fashion. But at the same time, of course, there are things needs to be done on the ground by Afghan government. Everything US or NATO cannot do. It's also the responsibility of the Afghan government and the Afghan National Army and all other, that the violence should remain close to zero in order to achieve what they have decided in Doha peace process.
General Phillips, terrorist groups like Daesh, aka ISIS have been trying to derail the Afghan peace process, the Doha peace process. What's your analysis? How can these groups be neutralized before the American elections and also the US withdrawal from Afghanistan in November? Also, please comment on the fact that Pakistan has greatly facilitated the peace process and Pak-Afghan relations are improving, as we all can see. Do you think the issue of Afghan refugees will also be resolved once the peace is established in the region?
Yeah, these, as you say, Zain, these are really important questions. The Afghanistan, I think, has made great strides in recent years in terms of its forces of law and order, its security forces, its army, its police, its governance. But there's still a long way to go. And as many of us found to our cost, as Pakistan knows better than anyone, that providing the rule of law and peace and security in certain parts of Afghanistan is extremely difficult. So can you eradicate groups like ISIS and things like that completely from the map of terrorism? Not easily. But one can try and get it into perspective in that they're likely, even after a peace process has travelled a lot further, there will still likely be violence because, as Rana said, there are many vested interests here. Not least of which is the drugs, the weapons trading, and all those sort of things. Lots of vested interests, but one needs to keep that sort of thing in perspective. I don't think certain groups who will be disruptors and spoilers in here will disappear from this space for many years to come. But it's a question of controlling and containing them. In terms of the refugees, of course, one has in mind, if one hasn't had experience in the area of refugees living in UNHCR tents and things like that, then of course, as again, you will know far better than anyone, that a lot of these refugees have now been in Pakistan for more than 1, 2, and sometimes 3 generations. And they have livelihoods, they have economies and everything else. Managing that will be a gradual process all around trust and the economy and things like that. So again, one shouldn't expect an overnight change, but one should expect that with certain incentives and pressures and things like that, then people will rightly return to their homeland when it's safe and secure and prosperous enough to do so.
Mr. Athar Javed, would you please shed some light on what General Phillips just stated and also explain to us and elaborate Pakistan's facilitation in the Afghan peace process?
Yeah, I think partially I would say that this is correct, that they won't go away and disappear. But, I'm of the view that if United States and NATO has to do a comprehensive, sustainable peace, they also have to support to the national government or the coming government or the interim setup or the current one to neutralize them as they did in other parts of the world. Because the reason is that entire plan, of course, entire plan of states are quite the opposite what the non-state have their mind. Their sponsors are quite different, as we all know, and their desires and the goals are opposite to peace. So there is a need to basically develop a systematic approach to neutralize them, maybe in phases. So deprive them from their funding and their command and control system. And if it comes to really fighting on the grounds, to fight them out. Because this is, we are talking about ending a war, the longest war in the US history, and also other member countries. And secondly, the economies are actually really in trouble in most of the countries, developed countries, and the UN and the NATO members. They're really facing huge crises. So there is a need that they should create that kind of window where it should be, the peace can be achieved without these non-state actors. In terms of, I can add one more thing, that since we were talking about the spoilers, we in Pakistan, normally the approach is that India makes a US and India makes the Pakistan-centric policy in Afghanistan. In Pakistan has no objection, of course, that India should have a relationship as a nation state. They have the right to invest in the country. They have the right to rebuild or whatever a regional state can do to facilitate peace. But there are, of course, serious allegations on India that they do use these non-state actors based in Afghanistan, like TTP and others, and BLA, or for that matter, the ICE, to support them, because we have to understand that the success of this peace would definitely enhance the credibility of the regional actors in terms of facilitating. It's been long, very long, 2 decades almost now, that the things are going in the wrong direction in terms of facilitation and others. There are objectionable approaches which were adopted by the former U.S. Policymakers in terms of isolating Pakistan, I would say. But at the moment, since the things are getting better, so we should try to take as much as we can diplomatic cautions, also to make India understand that the stability in Afghanistan would bring stability to Pakistan and South Asia, and this would give much more better chance to both countries to move forward in terms of their relations.
General Phillips, I want to get to a very important question. Pakistan and the UK's cooperation has been remarkably good. It has significantly improved, especially in the areas of international development support and CT operations. Which areas still need more focus between Pakistan and the United Kingdom?
Well, as you pointed out, Zain, traditionally, historically, and in recent years, the relationship between Pakistan and the UK has remained very close, and there are lots of well-known reasons for that. And it's heartwarming, frankly, to maintain such closeness during such a turbulent period throughout the world, not just for the violence in Afghanistan and counter-terrorism and everything else, but as Rana pointed out before, through sort of all sorts of crises, not least of which is the current one. And one hopes that from that platform, as we hopefully move beyond the COVID crisis, there'll be lots of areas for expansion. The area that really should take off from here on is trade. Trade and economic relationships. Pakistan's economy is changing. It's changed a lot in recent years. There are areas where the tech sector, for example, is starting to grow, industry starting to grow. Pakistan is looking to be an exporter in all sorts of different areas. The diaspora in the UK is generally a prosperous and industrious diaspora, very closely linked with all aspects of UK society and all of that. And there's a lot to be gained from moving beyond the sort of the aid, the development, to trading as complete equals in here for economic prosperity. I suspect there are other areas where the security relationship can probably develop as well. I mean, we're looking at a world that needs to think very carefully about its resilience, its health resilience, and health resilience as an area of national security. And there are areas there where the UK and Pakistan can continue to develop thinking and develop best practices and work together.
Mr. Rana Javed, would you like to give your analysis on Pakistan's cooperation and partnership with the United Kingdom?
Yeah, absolutely, because I have witnessed many cooperations from outside, actually, as a student of political science. We do observe the foreign and security relation between the countries, and I can categorically say that there is a great room actually to work along with Pakistan and other diaspora, and of course with the private companies, public-private partnership. There are many companies in Britain and also in Pakistan that they can work together. It's only a matter of taking initiative, actually. I know the procedures that had been in the past maybe cumbersome and unstructured, but at the moment the things are better, clear. The foreign investors are greatly encouraged. And also, joint ventures, JVs are really possible. I would say that not only to improve the security relation, but in the field of technology, building Pakistan's capacity in the field of healthcare and clean water, for example, and also in the area of special, I would say, that to building low income housings. This is the area which has opened up in the past couple of years, with the Prime Minister's promise to give more homes to the low income people, and there are many other areas, to be honest, from real estate to security. But I think we need in Pakistan technological advancement, whatever UK had to share with Pakistan, and experience they have in capacity building in terms of healthcare, because healthcare has tested of all countries, and unfortunately the signs have been very bleak, and during this COVID-19 thing. So I think there is a need to develop implementation plan, actually, because there is one thing that we give an idea and you proceed with it, and then something happens and it stops. We must find a way between the two countries to have more joint ventures, public-private partnership, and just start it, because even starting with the prototype projects would work, because it takes time for a discussion after discussion, and then sometimes something happened bureaucratically and it doesn't go through. So I think my suggestion would be, in terms of taking a plan, finding a partner, and go for it. This is the way I think we'll start moving towards long-lasting partnership.
I mean, there are already lots and lots of joint Anglo-Pakistani businesses and business programs and things like that. You know, I sat at an all-party parliamentary group a little while ago, just listening to some extremely interesting discussion around construction projects, housing projects, and things like this. And if we can get to the point where the governments are actively supporting this sort of interaction, I mean, you mentioned technology. I think technology is an area where there can be a huge amount of interaction to share some of the things. I know that at the moment Pakistan is got some of the great coders and the great software companies operating in places like the Punjab, where there are already business interactions. The more we can do around that, the better.
General Phillips, I want to get to a very relevant question. We're talking about the post-COVID era, and we all know that it has changed the world. Rather, it has stopped the world. It has stopped the world since the last few months or more than that. How do you see what will happen if a second wave comes, if a second wave of COVID-19 comes globally? And what is the role of cyberspace? I mean, it is increased. We all know that things are getting digital. Tell us, give your comments on cybersecurity. We want to know what you have to say about that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, the COVID crisis has been an unbelievable tragedy for the world that has stopped so many things in its tracks. And I think the COVID crisis, despite the fact that many countries are now moving beyond the initial wave and starting to return to some sense of restoring some business, albeit with restrictions and things like that, that we're probably yet to feel the worst of the crisis. I mean, the deaths and things have been terribly tragic, but unless the world globally manages to restore forward movement in the economies and things like this, then we're going to see the return to poverty and famine and all these sort of things. And we need to find areas where we can work constructively and collectively together to guard against that, and see what we can do to dig ourselves out of the economic, social and health hole that we find ourselves in the moment. It's a great test for world collaboration, where we move beyond individual countries just looking after themselves and seeing if we can restore ourselves, just as we've been discussing now, to find new ways of operating multinationally, multilaterally in some of these areas. The thought of a second wave, of course, is dreadful. And what is really important is that all the sort of things I've just been talking around sort of sharing health resilience and economic improvements, restoring trade, and really actively getting behind that. We've also really got to share understanding around how to look after ourselves. This area that I talked about earlier, which sits in some ways in the security space around resilience. How can we make countries who really have very little in the way of organized healthcare reaching right across the country, how can they become more resilient and look after themselves? How can we make economies more resilient in all these sort of areas? I think these are the really important things to focus on now, because never mind if we might or might not get a second wave, let's hope we don't, of COVID. But what COVID has shown to us is that pandemics are real, that they can be hugely damaging. And if one was going to be a terrible pessimist, one might say, well, this COVID crisis that we've got has been a relatively light touch pandemic. it sounds awful to say that in the face of so many deaths around the world, but in some ways, could have been worse.
Mr. Atul Javed, would you like to add on what General Phillips just said, and also shed some light upon cybersecurity, cyberspace? What do you want to say about that?
I think, first of all, the expression resilience is a key to all of the problems. The resilience in terms of building capacity, not resilience in terms of sustaining without capacity. So that's a very important understanding. Why I think Phil is using resilience, because we have to learn to live with pandemic in terms of unending fear and psychological fatigue and all other problems entail with it. The impact of individual economies, economy of the communities, and also of the states. So finding a way in the middle to develop and adapt this idea of living with it is much better than to reject the idea. So that is why resilience with the capacity and resilience with the new normal would help Pakistan and United Kingdom and the other countries to counter if, God forbid, there is any second wave. Obviously, if we look at the history of the second wave in 1918 Spanish flu, most of the people killed, especially look in Denmark, they were killed in second wave, because the first wave were only 20 to 50,000, and then people just opened up and they went to normal, and then they killed more than around 300,000 people. So we have to all understand, we learn from the history, we are learning now how to live with it. So that is where I would say the point is that we have to do a really lot of homework in terms of social distancing and learn to live in sort of psychological fatigue, I would say, not at intense level, a level where a human can sustain. Now we have learned that what do we do if we only use machines, less human interaction, how do we go out? What time should we go out? Should we really go to public meetings a lot, or should we handle it on online like we are doing it now? So that's what my analysis is.
General Phillips, I want to get to the last question. As we've been discussing in the show, the remarkable cooperation and relationship and ties between Pakistan and the United Kingdom, would you like to give, in the last question, would you like to give some recommendations on the future and on how to improve further the ties between Pakistan and the United Kingdom? Yes.
Well, I think at the very top of government, again, as nations get beyond the extreme pain of dealing with the immediate crisis, governments need to lift their eyes to the horizon and look at their place in the globe for all the reasons we just discussed. And one of the things that our two governments can do is talk constructively about a plan. And Rana made this point earlier, and it's really important to have a plan going forwards as to strategically, what are we going to do together, not just for each other, but for the region. And that plan will involve discussions around foreign policy, not least of which, of course, is Afghanistan. But of course, there's lots of foreign policy shared interests around the Middle East, where Pakistan is extremely influential, and with all around Asia and China and the relationship with India, all those foreign policy areas. And all of that flows into the points I was trying to make earlier around how do you operationalize that in terms of trade, the economy, prosperity, sharing technological, industrial progress, and all those sort of things. And that would all fall out of a top-level plan in many respects. In terms of security cooperation, I think security cooperation has remained as pretty much as close as good as it could be. I know, for example, our army still has an extraordinarily close relationship with the Pakistani army. The leaders of our army and armed forces probably spend as much, if not more, time interacting with their opposite numbers in Pakistan than almost any other nation in the world, in many respects. And that should be sustained.
Thank you so much, General Philip Jones, for being on Security Watch. It was a pleasure having you, sir.
It was a pleasure and indeed my honor.
Thank you so much, Rana Atul Javed, for being on Security Watch. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much, Sam.
This was Lieutenant General Philip Jones. He is a 3-star British general and also the former Chief of Staff at NATO and a senior security advisor. We were discussing on the topics of the Doha and Afghan peace process. We were also discussing Pakistan and the United Kingdom ties. Our second guest, as always, is DG Pakistan House and also a senior geopolitical analyst, Mr. Rana Athar Javed. He gave his expert feedback on the topic. Until the next episode of Security Watch, keep on watching Security Watch. This is Zain Khan. Take care. Bye-bye.